Welcome back, everyone. This is part two of my incredible conversation with Chris Brubeck. So, Chris, part two it is.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
All right.
In 2013, you were on tour in France. You were playing with the orchestra, a piece that you and your dad, Dave Brubeck, composed honoring the photographer Ansel Adams, right?
Yeah.
Very interesting concept, by the way, because you were projecting his photography behind the orchestra. Talk about interesting, collaborative, great, interesting, original music.
Yeah.
So 2013, and you had a conversation with the cultural attaché, United States, mentioned that President Obama was going to be in Europe, in France, in Normandy, for the 70th anniversary of the invasion, and wanted you to approach you about composing a piece.
Yeah, he had seen me play. When I did this concert with Ansel Adams, I did my trombone concerto, and also they said, will you please play like an orchestral arrangement you have of Take Five or Blue Rondo? I said, get me a good sax player. So they said, I know just the guy, and his name is Guillaume Saint-Jean, or William St. James, if you take the American version of his name. And he was a great sax player. And after we did this performance, and we really had a rapport, but we barely knew each other, we were doing a Q&A, an educational outreach for kids. And this 10-year-old kid raised his hand and said, you know, to Guillaume, why do you like American jazz so much? And he told this story, which was Guillaume's grandparents took Guillaume's father as a young boy the day of the invasion of D-Day in Normandy.
Wow.
He was very sick, and they took him in a wheelbarrow to an Allied field hospital. And it turned out he had a burst appendix, and they saved his life. And he heard, as he was recovering, American jazz music in these tents. So Guillaume's father loved jazz, became a country doctor and an amateur jazz musician, and used to do house calls and drive around. And Guillaume was in the car, and his father was playing 8-track tapes of Dave Brubeck's music. so Guillaume knew my dad's music from that. And so when he told that story, I didn't know, because I just met him. I said, that's amazing. My dad was in Patton's army, so he was also there. It's kind of weird. Here we are, two guys playing music together, and our fathers, 70 years ago, were involved in the same pivotal moment in human civilization, the history of the world.
So you sat down and decided to create a piece, right?
Yeah, well, after this cultural attaché,
Yes.
he said, you should do it together. It should be a Franco-American project. It will be really different.
Boy, it's brilliant.
And he says, and the State Department will support this with some seed money, and and then the head of the Orchestra Symphonique Britannia, said he'll get on board with it and do some, so it was this big project. We originally outlined the piece, because Guillaume plays some fabulous French musicians that are going to be at Glens Falls. They're imported from France, like a fine wine. A great button accordion player. I mean, this guy is like if Chick Corea played button accordion.
Wow.
He's this amazing genius. And other great musicians also are going to be an electric bass player and a drummer, and I'll play trombone, and Guillaume will play saxes, and it sort of tells the story musically in 8 different movements of what it was like to be in Normandy, pre the Germans invading, and then goes on, and also the point of view of my dad, who was a cowboy originally. Just imagine how his life was turned upside down. He worked as a kid as a cowboy in a 40,000-acre ranch, and then he's in World War II in Patton's army. So it's like, wow. This whole thing is being told through music.
Now, you mentioned that it's in 8 movements, so I want to go back, because before we went on air, Chris told me that, when you think about Normandy, you think about the invasion, of course, there's all kinds of, pun intended, I guess, bombastic sounds and all of these other sort of things, a lot of emotion, a lot of conflict, a lot of discordant kinds of things. However, right before, tranquility.
Yeah.
Right? So you really have composed this piece in 8 movements to take it from that time before the invasion through the invasion.
Right. And all of World War II and then into the end when there's a hope for peace and never again. And Guillaume and I feel very strongly that we want to make sure that the next generation coming up, really remembers basically what their grandparents were involved, and most of their grandparents are passing away.
That's right.
And, we were in a school in France, we were asking, kids in 5th grade, the teacher said, how many people died on D-Day? And some kids said, 300. Some kids said 300,000. They really didn't know. And I got to say, having performed this piece in America and in France, it has more impact in America because they were the invaded place. They were occupied. Imagine if New England were occupied by the Germans for 4 years. And, you know, so it has a different thing. But there's plenty of, like, if you're an American and you go to France for any of the anniversaries of D-Day, you are still treated like a liberating prince, and American flags from every house, and there are roads named General Patton Boulevard, and you know, it's very deep in their history.
Now, you performed this piece when the president did come over for the 70th anniversary event,
yeah, the premiere was right around that time. He wasn't literally at the performance, but there was a lot of heavy French officials that were, and the whole country, actually the whole world was excited about remembering that pivotal point in history. So we've done it maybe 5 or 6 times in France, and then we played it once with an orchestra in Florida and with an orchestra in Oakland near San Francisco. And I remember the headline, they also had Tchaikovsky Fifth in the program, and the headline was accordion player steals a show from Tchaikovsky. I'm telling you, this guy's unbelievably heavy. But it's a very interesting collaborative with a lot of different styles. It's some of it is jazzy and some of it's very straight ahead classical, but there is an interesting thing because you can tell what Guillaume wrote, you can tell what I wrote, and that they blend together, they complement each other. And then sometimes I would write his theme from the first one, but I would reorchestrate it and present it my way. He would take one of my themes and present it his way. So
this is
you can
going
hear
to be
that
a
at work.
very, very unique experience. Now, you met Charles Pels, the conductor for Glenn's Hall Symphony Orchestra, a couple of times, right?
Yeah.
And it sat down. Now, of course, Charles, as you know, he's a frequent guest here on Look Today, feels very strongly about veterans and their contribution, and came up with this idea, contacted you, and as a result, as you mentioned, we'll be flying in some musicians from France to perform with the Glens Falls Symphony Orchestra on November 8th.
Yeah.
And the name of the piece is Brothers in Arts.
Yeah.
Well, what a fabulous name, by the way.
Yeah.
Who came up with that?
Guillaume did, and actually he said in French it sort of translates. I mean, in a way that between brothers in arms and brothers in arts.
Yes, right.
But it means something slightly different, colloquially in French. So he came up with that. But Charles, I just told him that this piece was coming because I met him at Lucerne, and we were just talking about what's coming up next, And he said, I want in on that. My father was in World War II. His father, God bless him, is still alive. And, he's into honoring that generation. I mean, I don't know how they did what they did.
The greatest generation, right? And you know it. I mean, I'm fortunate my father, who's in World War II, and he's still alive, too.
Oh, wow.
And it's just really something to listen to the stories. Now, the piece itself with the 8 movements, this is a piece you get really involved with. It isn't like listening to a song. This is about an hour long, right?
Yeah.
By the time you move through the movements, and of course the voyage you take emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually in that course of the hour is phenomenal. So, Chris, I can't wait to see this piece, and I know our viewers feel the same way.
Yeah,
the concert is November 8th. It's at I forgot where it is in Glens Falls, but we'll figure that part out.
It's where they always give their concerts, their big auditorium.
It has to be the auditorium at the high school. That's right.
I don't know, literally, but I'll be there.
Yeah, that's right.
I promise.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
I look forward to this so much.
It's so great to speak with you and to meet you, and I appreciate you tuning your viewers into what's coming on, because it's going to be a happening. It's not often you get an international musical happening.
You don't, and leave it to you and leave it to Charles Pels. So,
yeah.
Thanks, Chris, very much for coming in.
Thank you.
To see this interview again, you can head to our website, looktvonline.com.